Absolutely, but I'll be there in a few minutes. I've got something to do now. See you later. Hello, everybody. Systems science and complexity management. Systems complexity can be real and absolute, in which case it's probably to do with more variety, more connectivity, and more convolution inside the system. However, it can also be perceived and relative, and we can see complexity and see patterns in complexity where they may not even exist. Nature's complex nonlinear systems are fine examples of real systems complexity. They have greater power densities, self-healing, auto-adaptation, self-replication. And if we want to really understand complexity and take advantage of it, exploit it, then perhaps we should use nature's example. For 4.5 billion years, Earth produced very simple life. Bacteria, multicellular algae. Then, 530 million years ago came the Cambrian Explosion, an extravagance of weird, bizarre fractal life forms, sex, and not just for teenagers, evolution of eyes, predator-prey arms race, all today's body plans, architectures were created. Cambrian was marked by at least 3 mass extinctions, however, followed by continual resurgence of complexity, leading to more forms of life. Wasn't that dramatic? And there was no one there to watch. Evidently, complexity auto-generates. Complexity leads to order and to disorder. The Big Bang not only creates stellar systems, galaxies, superclusters, but also black holes that destroy. The Hymenoptera and the Isoptera, the social insects, they create hives and colonies, but they also create swarms that disperse them. Homo sapiens creates families, societies, cultures, civilizations, which eventually collapse, often spectacularly. Which leads to the idea that there ought to be a systems life cycle theory for addressing issues, for developing system concepts, even perhaps a theory base for systems engineering. There is a premise that interconnected systems driven by an external energy source will tend to a cyclic progression in which system variety is generated. Dominance emerges to suppress the variety. The dominant mode decays or collapses, and survivors regenerate interconnected variety. That leads to a unified systems hypothesis, that open systems form, develop, sustain, collapse and decay, and reform continually in a process that we could call entropic cycling. I have proposed a law of cyclic progression, in which open interacting systems entropy cycles continually at rates and between levels determined by available energy. This is as an alternative, perhaps, to Kelvin's second law of thermodynamics, which is for closed systems only. The unified systems hypothesis may be presented in map form, and here we see it with energy, top right here, pumping variety generation. The different varieties react to create connected variety, leading to a tendency to stability and to system cohesion. Preferred patterns form, which lead to dominance, and they can suppress variety, in which case there is a tendency to decay and collapse, and that creates new varieties and more varieties to process, again going round the circle clockwise. Notice that variety generation also creates dispersive influences. These are varieties that don't connect up and become effectively like pathogens. They knock out systems cohesion And there is a positive feedback loop here, which explains how you can get catastrophic collapse of complex systems. We can model that map, and when we do so, we get this sort of form, with dynamic equilibrium here interspersed with dips as pathogens have they go, and then every so often a collapse. These are happening at unpredictable intervals. But the more the energy, the greater the level of energy for dynamic equilibrium, and the more frequent the collapses and reconstitutions. An example of UHS is global warming. There's the law of cyclic progression again, and the Earth's climate is a complex of open interacting systems. So the unified systems hypothesis predicts that global warming will result in more extreme weather conditions occurring more frequently. So more storms, floods, more hot and more cold, but more extended calms and more extreme droughts. However, weather systems behave chaotically, so it will be impossible to predict individual event timings or locations. Here are some USH use cases. Revolution, as in the domino collapse of the Soviet Union, politics, international economic cycles, bureaucracies that exist like aircraft carriers mainly to defend themselves, accountants who destroy companies by shedding variety to survive an economic winter. And as a classic example, ancient Egypt cycled through 3 unified epochs with intermediate periods of relative disorder. Here you can see those 3 periods, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom, with the life cycles of each kingdom being presented by a USH life cycle map. Each epoch built society slowly, established, then collapsed, each built on the residues from its predecessor. So we have apparently entropic cycling in social history. Is this a faint echo of the Cambrian Explosion? Perhaps. Here is an instance using a causal loop model of how the Pyramid Age came to something of an end, with the pharaoh initially as supreme holy divine being, identity of Egypt, who must live forever, eventually being reduced to the level of one amongst many divine beings who would row the bark or sailing boat of Re, the sun god, across the sky. However mighty, reduced to being simply divine. Unified systems hypothesis in systems engineering. It offers a unique approach to complex systems engineering for natural, social and socio-technical systems. Instead of the usual mechanistic basis for systems engineering, this is an organic or biological paradigm based on the principles of holism, synthesis and organicism. It anticipates continually changing environments. It maintains and increases connected variety to accommodate changing environments, and in particular it promotes harmony through synthesis. Another approach taken from biology shows how biology sorts out levels of organization. So at level 1 here on the picture we have the cell, which has emergent properties. A number of cells together can create a tissue, which has emergent properties. At level 3 we have an organ comprised of many tissues brought together. The organ has emergent properties, and several organs come together to make an organ system, which has emergent properties which lead to an organism at level 5 and onto population and community. If we try and put man-made systems against that on the right-hand side, the obvious place for system is against organ system, which means that organ equates to subsystem, tissue to composite, and cell to component. Above system at level 4, going on to level 5, we have platform, and we humans would be a platform as we are an organism, and group and company. We can go further with that and introduce the idea of different forms of engineering. And we can see that Project systems engineering comes in at levels 3, 4 and 5. 6 and 7 might give us business systems engineering. 8 might give us industry systems engineering, and 9 might give us socio-economic or societal systems engineering. However, 1 and 2 down at the bottom don't seem to be systems engineering so much as artifact engineering. The social genotype is an extension of our understanding of DNA, which expresses the identity of an individual. The social genotype, on the other hand, expresses the identity and culture of a social group. Roles and relationships form stable, palpable structures. The relationships are mediated via common shared belief systems, so shared attitudes, viewpoints, Weltanschauungen, ethics and morals, which may be very different from those of the individuals fulfilling the roles. Then there is the generic reference model, which looks on any system as being considered under the simultaneous aspects of being, doing, and thinking. And we can see that being stems from form management, function management gives us doing, and behavior management gives us thinking. We shall look first at function management before going on to look at behavior management. Function management made up of mission, viability, and resources. Here we can see mission management at the top in red, viability management in the center as green, and resource management in blue at the bottom. And if we follow mission management, we can see that from the operational environment we get information, which allows us to set objectives, which allows us to strategize and plan to achieve those objectives, then to execute the plan and to cooperate with others before acting within the operational environment, which changes that environment so that we get fresh information. Similarly with resource management, all we can do with resources really is acquire them, store them, distribute them, convert them to be useful, dispose of the waste back into the resource environment. And homeostasis consists of 5 elements. And so homeostasis for synergy, maintenance, survival, and evolution. And those 5 together give us viability. We can look at the GRM in layered virtual machine format. We can see mission management along the top, resource management down the left-hand side, viability management down the right-hand side, behavior management in the center, and form management at the bottom. If we elaborate that, we can see that mission management includes decision-making and executing decisions and cooperating with others. Behavior, which we'll come to later, contains a number of rather strange things: world models, tacit knowledge, ethics and morals, training, doctrine, and so forth. We can expand that further into a C3I system, which are mapping onto a layered GRM. The top remains the same, except we now have recognition prime decision making there and naive decision making there. In the center we have the same as we had on the previous slide, but the lower arm form has come up. We now have a situation display with radar and navigation, resources display with weapon management, battle damage display with internal system sensors, weapons control, weapons, and so forth, all connected to an operational environment. So finally to the GRM behavior management model, which we have been talking about but not going into. So first of all, it starts off as nature versus nurture. And then we get stimulus coming into cognition, where we get an interpretation of that stimulus based on experience, tacit knowledge, world models, and beliefs. Followed by selection of behavior, which introduces the idea of behavioral archetypes, motivation, and then excitation and response intent. So we have stimulus, response, which is the other way of looking at behavior. Nature is made up, we're led to understand by Jung, of these elements, and the belief system appears to be made up from these sort of elements, including, importantly, training. Just looking at the behavioural archetypes from ancient Egypt to give us a handle on them, they're the ones that are in red particularly, the others are all of interest. But let's look at the red ones. Pharaoh as the self and individual of the people. The Magus, the high priest, that's the magician, Mr. Fixer in modern terms. There's the creator, the healer, he who can make things better, the divine king, who rules as by right, and then there's the king as shepherd, the Neolithic cattle farmer image. That particular image is very obviously alive and well today, as for example here on the left, where we see the bishop with his crozier and the pharaoh with his crook. Then there's the belief system, which comes as individual elements and group elements leading to social cohesion. The belief system gives the straightforward believer's world model, which allows him to interpret everyday situations, reducing his psychological uncertainty and reinforcing the belief system. The belief system does not have to be in any way related to what we might call ground truth, just so long as it gives the right explanations. Here you can see the generic reference model being used as a framework to hang design on. This is a design for an autonomous peace officer. And autonomous systems will, in the future, we hope, behave ethically and morally, and we need an integral belief system to accommodate uncertainty and to make judgments. Along the centre there is the behaviour management model. Around here we have the mission management model, and on that we have hung, as though it were a framework, situation awareness and recognition prime decision making and control handoff. Interesting developments. Let's turn now to chaos. Deterministic chaos first. There are two main varieties of chaos as we know. Deterministic chaos, which leads to an exponential growth of uncertainty, and weak chaos, which is a parallel growth of uncertainty. That parallel is shared with fractals and self-organizing criticality, suggesting some phenomenological commonality. Chaos is organized, structured, and bounded. Deterministic chaos was first really brought to light by Poincaré in 1887. He undertook a maths competition, which was going to be a birthday present for the King of Sweden. And he was dealing with something called the three-body problem. Three celestial bodies revolving about each other, how do they behave? His first solution, which he thought was the best solution, was in the top graph. However, he realized before he'd actually handed in his answer that he overlooked that there was possibility of another answer, completely different. And instead of a nice regular solution, like the top one, he found that there was an irregular solution, one that never repeated, like the bottom. And this was all to do with starting conditions. And he was the first person really to demonstrate chaotic behavior from an apparently simple Newtonian system. Poincaré, the father of chaos. Then along came Lorenz, and he produced Lorenz's butterfly and the strange attractor, which never overwrites. And this gives us an interesting signature, and we shall see a number of signatures as we continue. That's the signature of the strange attractor. This is another example of chaos caused by excessive coupling. Take a darkened room, take a camera, TV camera, point it at a TV screen, and then light a match in between them. The light goes into the camera. From the camera it goes to the TV screen, then back into the camera and round in circles. And the result is this, caused by over-tight coupling and non-linearity in the system. Very interesting patterns. I'd like to say we totally understand how that all works, but I don't think we do. This is simulated chaos, where we have three bodies. At the bottom here we have a very simple model in Stellar. That's systems, thinking, environment and learning laboratory approach. We have three systems connected to each other. They're simple reservoirs with taps, and the coupling between them is being ramped up as you go from left to right in the diagram. Notice the high degree of texture and pattern within the chaos, going to three solutions at that particular point before finally becoming unstable in the end. Complex behavior can emerge from the simplest of systems without the designer, owner or user having any knowledge of it at all. Weak chaos, or particularly self-organized criticality. Example here, this is Back and Chen's sand pile, where they were dropping grains of sand onto the top of a sand cone, and when they plotted out the sand grains per avalanche against the frequency of such avalanches, they got this surprising result, which was a straight line on a log-log curve. They were in fact investigating earthquakes using this technique. You can simulate the behavior of that with this model, which is a simple stellar model again, using two different probabilities, one to do with the mean height going above a certain level, and the other to do with the size of the avalanche. Those two together give you this behavior, which seems to be the same as self-organized criticality. And you get a simple attractor, which ends up being a bit tangled, but is nonetheless quite simple. Occasionally, these two probabilities combine to give you major excursions. That's 40,000 events there, so it doesn't happen that often. There's the rare event signature, which shows that it is really quite different. And this seems to be congruent with Taleb's notion of black swan events. Lewis F. Richardson's diagram, this was showing the number of people killed in a war against the interval between such wars. Richardson drew the diagram because he wanted to show, by extrapolation, how long it would be before we had a war so big that it wiped out the world's population. When you plot his diagram onto a log-log curve, so you get another of these straight lines on a log-log curve. So we have Back and Chen's sand pile for tectonic plate movements and earthquakes. Weak chaos is found in all sorts of places. Stock exchange price movements, 1/f noise in conductors, electron flow around fixed iron grids, distances between cars on a busy motorway, asteroid size or frequency, crime statistic, and deaths in war despite machine guns, tanks, gas, atomic bombs. None of these cause deviation from the straight line. Fractal patterns and weak chaos arise widely in nature and are seen to arise where free flow is hampered or constricted. Here's a simple model of golf balls with marbles. The marbles are being dropped down from the surface and they build up against the golf balls and eventually go between them, producing avalanches very much in the same way as the sand pile model does. And this is analogous to behavior in many real-world situations. Criminal versus the police, where the police would be the golf balls. Turnstiles and checkouts, where the turnstiles would be the golf balls and the people would be the marbles. Economics, turbulence, production systems, and many, many more. Here's a slightly different one. Now, this is the Battle of Britain, and the top chart shows daily aircraft losses for the RAF and for the Luftwaffe. The bottom chart shows day-to-day variability in aircraft losses. And I ask, is there a hint of a butterfly shape? I think there may be. So was the Battle of Britain right on the edge of chaos? Is there a relationship between deterministic chaos and self-organized criticality? Ancient Egypt depended on annual Nile inundations for good crops. Good inundation, good yield. But too high or too low, poor yield. The inundation was driven, as we now know, by weather to the south. So, deterministic chaos? Population rose during good inundations when there was plenty of food. But a poor inundation led to famine and the population fell. Here we can see this in simulation, stellar again, and there's chaos at the top and self-organized criticality in the shape of Nile population at the bottom. Which I think is perhaps quite a neat example of the relationships between the two patterns. The signature of self-organized criticality is that of a simple attractor, as we can see here. There's no hint of strange attractors. This gives us a metaphor for the planet's impending problems. And the stele on the right from the Louvre shows the effect of famine in the Nile Valley. In summary then, complexity gives life, is a fact of life. There's a continual build, stabilize, collapse is the way of life. Systems science seeks to understand, manage and exploit complexity, not avoid it. Embracing complexity offers capability, intelligence, flexibility, adaptability, self-replication and so on. But nature systems engineering took 530 million years to evolve to the present efficient, intelligent organisms. Perhaps systems engineering should adopt an evolutionary biological paradigm rather than its current mechanistic one, but evolve solutions to problems rather more quickly. We may not have that much time left. Thank you for listening.